Hello there, this is Bryan Alaspa, one of the co-producers and the writer of the stories that you hear on When the Night Comes Out. Thank you for being patient with us. It's been a while, and we're hard at work on a new season, or at least talking about it, and we've got some good things that are going to be coming your way probably later this year and into 2026. But we didn't want to leave you hanging on Halloween. So, Allie and I decided that we would present to you the When the Night Comes Out Halloween special for 2025. A couple of truly terrifying stories, brand new that you haven't heard before, that we will present to you tonight. So thanks for being patient, but for now, sit back, relax, prepare to be scared. Thanks for listening, and happy Halloween.
When the Night Comes Out presents Dibs. Carl Newman had just moved into his new apartment. Finally, he had a place in the city, not far from Wrigley Field, but not quite in the official borders of Wrigleyville. In short, it was perfect for him. He was on the lower floor of the 3-flat, just above the basement dweller and beneath a still empty apartment. It had taken years for him to get up the money to be able to afford a place in the city, especially a 2-bedroom, but here he was, and he planned to enjoy it. That morning, the forecast was calling for a very large snowstorm. This was not unusual for Chicago, but his first for that street. Outside, visible easily from his window, were the cars parked along the curb. He had a spot too, but he often parked other places because it seemed there was always a car parked in his designated spot. The same goddamn car. It was an old beater. The markings had been ripped off and the entire car appeared to be more rust than metal. The windows were foggy all the time, and it appeared to be slowly rotting away into the pavement. For some reason, the neighbors did not seem to mind, and he had never seen one of the infamous orange-colored stickers on the window indicating someone was going to take it away as an abandoned vehicle. One day, before the air started turning bitter cold and the leaves were changing, Carl asked his downstairs neighbor, who was also his landlord, "What's the deal with that car?" "That one?" Dale asked, hooking his thumb in the direction of it. "I don't know, but I think it just had dibs." "Dibs?" Carl asked, his face twisted up. "That only happens in the winter, right? You clear out a space and then get to, put a chair in it because you have dibs?" In Chicago, when the winter hit and you spent time shoveling or snowblowing your space in front of your home, it was common to essentially call dibs. What that meant in practicality was people put out lawn chairs or stolen road cones or chairs with boards across them. The city discouraged it, and snowplows often just plowed up the objects into a snow pile, but that never stopped people from doing it every year. In this case, however, the dibs seemed to involve an actual car. "Well, that car has always been there since I moved in," Dale replied. "Not sure who owns it, but, it's funny, most of the time I don't even notice it." "Well, it's in my spot," Carl protested rather weakly. "I mean, it's fine now, but when winter hits, I want that spot. I should have dibs, not this person." Dale just laughed. "Relax, I'm sure there will be a spot for you when the snow comes. Hell, you work from home most of the time anyway." Carl wasn't so sure, but he kind of let it go. Kind of. One night, during one of those weird Chicago fall days where the temperature suddenly rockets up to summer levels, he was outside with some of the other neighbors. They were talking, watching lightning flash in the distance as a cold front approached, and drinking beers. No one mentioned the car, and Carl felt doing so would just cause him to be labeled as the weird one, but he kept casting his eyes to the thing. It sat there silently, like a bulldog half asleep. It had to have been a Chrysler of some sort, maybe a GMC. He wished he knew cars more, but he had never found them to be anything more than utilitarian. Did it start? Did it run? Could he use it to get from one place to another? Great, then it was a fine automobile in his mind. So he had no clue. It was like a blank slate with no markings. When the group broke up, as the storm was almost upon them, Carl hung out a bit longer. Just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, he walked off the porch and over to the car. He studied the windows. No one inside, nothing out of the ordinary other than the car itself. Rusted, but also with silver patches. There were license plates, but he had no one he could send them to find ownership. No tickets on the windows, nothing to indicate anyone even noticed the goddamn thing. Dibs, he snorted. Fuck you and your dibs. That's for fucking lawn chairs in the winter. Just then, as a loud rumble of thunder shook the ground, the engine of the car started. Carl jumped back at least 3 feet. Inside, the light turned on, but it was dim through the cloudy windows. What the holy fuck? He asked the car. He reached out and touched the hood. He felt the vibration of the engine through his fingers. Did this thing somehow have a remote start installed? Carl looked around, scanning the apartments as the rain started to fall in earnest. He was instantly soaked, and the rain fell so hard it was impossible to see if anyone was standing at one of the windows with a starter in his or her hands. "Fuck you!" he yelled. "There's no dibs!" Overhead, the sky answered back angrily. He looked back at the car and leaned close to the window. Just then, a bolt of lightning flashed, and for a moment, he was certain there was someone or something behind the wheel. A skeleton. A skeleton wearing rotted clothes and whose grinning face had turned to look at him. Then it was gone, and the thunder roared. Carl backed away, shaking his head. Nope, I did not just see that. Too many beers. With that, he turned and ran back to his apartment. By the time he was inside, leaning against the door, dripping onto the floor and out of breath, he had almost convinced himself. Outside, the thunder roared. Carl did not approach the car again. Although he always saw it, glanced at it, he did not want to approach it. As the fall wore on and the warm weather even stretched into December, he began to think he'd never need to worry about parking spaces, snow, and dibs. Let the goddamn car stay where it was then. One day, while he was out for a brisk walk in the rapidly cooling air, he was walking back to his apartment with coffee in his hand. The sky was threatening, although the weather guessers were saying they would just get flurries. It was a reminder that the mild weather would not last. Whether it was in December or saving up for January, the snow would eventually come. As he was just walking past the car, he saw his neighbor Jane, who sometimes sat with the rest of them on the porch on mild nights. "Hey, Jane," he called and waved. Jane waved back. "Hey, Carl. I think winter might finally be about to arrive. What do you think?" He looked up at the clouds. There was something about winter clouds that just set them apart from summer. They appeared more like iron, sometimes silver. Mostly, they just seemed heavy, as if the snow they contained were too much. Carl wasn't sure if you could really smell snow, but the air did take on a different feel when a big storm approached in winter. "Yeah, think we might get some real snow," he replied. "Time to get out the shovels." They paused, both of them looking at the sky, and then Carl cast his eye down to the car. That goddamn car. "Do you know whose car that is?" he asked. "What car?" Carl pointed. "That one." Jane looked as if she hadn't noticed the thing before. "That one? Shit, that's been here forever. I heard it used to belong to a guy who was a real shitheel on this street. You know how people call dibs when they shovel snow? Supposedly this guy was a big believer in it, and when he put something in a spot, he'd defend it. I heard he went after a guy with a baseball bat once who tried to move the lawn chair he had put there. I also heard rumors the guy was into some weird shit." Carl cocked his head. "Weird shit?" Jane waved her arms. "Oh, people always pin all kinds of things on the cranky old neighbor. Rumors of rituals and being in league with Satan and all that crap. I never saw it. Funny though, I don't really remember his face. Or his name. Shit. Yeah, I thought he had died though. Jane put a hand to her chin as if thinking. I can't remember when or how. Not sure why the car's still there. I mean, that's supposed to be my spot, Carl answered. At least that was what I was told, but everyone seems to act like they can't even see the thing. Can't we get it towed away? I've been parking in front of an old building 3 blocks away and walking. I don't want to get frostbite. Hey, he had dibs, she said and laughed. I mean, call the cops, see what they do. Not sure why they haven't put those red or orange stickers all over it, declaring it an abandoned car as it is. Yeah, maybe. He had a sudden flash of the skeleton behind the wheel. That weird night with the thunderstorm where he had had too much to drink, which he had been sure was just a dream. He shuddered. Well, I guess I better head inside, he said, suddenly having a powerful desire to get away from the car. Take care of yourself, Jane. You too. Carl headed back to his apartment and somehow forgot about the car. He did not call the cops, didn't call anyone. Instead, he sat on his sofa watching television while balancing his laptop on his legs and doing work. When the storm started to hit that afternoon, sending first pellets of ice against his window, and then huge blasts of wind that shook the same windows and their frames, he finally looked up from his work. Damn it, he cursed as he put the laptop aside. I forgot to call the cops. He stood at his window and saw the snow falling sideways. Across the street, another neighbor struggled against the wind and snow to get back to his apartment. Carl noted the man had a beard and it was covered in ice and snow. Then he cast his eyes down to the car. That goddamn car in his fucking spot. Tomorrow he'd have to walk 3 blocks to get to his car and try to shovel it out of the snow. The weather report on the television just behind him was already touting this as a blizzard. He'd end up looking like that guy across the street with the ice in his beard. Even if his office said no one had to come in tomorrow, he'd still have to trudge the 3 blocks across the ice through piles of snow just to get to his car. Reluctantly, Carl turned away from the window and looked at the clock. It was only 3. That meant he still had at least 2 more hours of work to deal with before he could even worry about the storm. He sat back down, took up his laptop, gazed at the weather report, which was getting more and more grim by the minute, and started working again. When it got to 5, he shut down quickly. Sure enough, his company was telling people to stay home tomorrow, too. Carl felt a bit better about that, but not about the fact he still had to take a shovel for 3 blocks, nearly break his neck walking across the icy sidewalks, just to get there and dig his damn car out. He stood at the window again. It was hard to see out there now. In fact, he could barely see the sidewalk, let alone the buildings across the street. However, he could see the car. It shone silvery now, perhaps from the streetlight above. It almost was as if it were mocking him. You fucking car. He hissed at the window. That's my goddamn spot. It should be me that has dibs there. It was tempting to head out there now and maybe take a baseball bat to the damn thing. It would still be in the way, but he would feel like he had done something. Tomorrow, his neighbors would all be out there shoveling out their spots. Of course, there were rules in the city on most streets about parking along the curb. Basically, you weren't supposed to do it on many of the busier streets. His street, however, was a side street and no such rule applied. Had this been a major route, the snowplows would need room to clear the roads, and this car would have been towed ages ago. Maybe. For some reason, people seemed to not even realize how long the car had been there. Carl wondered how long it had been there. Just because it looked like an old car didn't mean it had been sitting there since the 70s. People collected older cars all the time. The fact there seemed to be no markings on it was also weird. What make and model was this car? Something about it was familiar, as if he had seen it in his youth around the city, but he couldn't put a finger on it. He had also seen a license plate and thought he had memorized it and taken a picture of it, but he couldn't remember it, and when he called up the image, it was all blurry. Then there was his dream. He was sure it was a dream that night he thought he saw a skeleton behind the wheel. What the hell would make him dream of something like that? No one seemed to remember whose car it was, only remembered it was there when he pointed to it, and yet he could see it every time he looked out the window. However, when he turned his back to it, he did forget it. Was the reason he saw it every time just because this was his apartment and it was supposed to be his parking space? When he moved in and his landlord told him where his space was, he didn't remember noticing the car then. What the fuck was happening around here? He suddenly looked around his apartment. Had the guy who owned that car lived in this very apartment? Of course, there was nothing here to tell him yes or no. Plus, he had been here for months, and not a single creaky door or strange footstep, let alone the manifestation of a skeleton man. It nagged at him now. As the snow came down and down, as the ice got thicker, then buried in the white stuff, his anger grew. It was not fair. Fucking dibs for an old car that no one remembered? It didn't matter to him if it was some weird-ass supernatural thing. It wasn't fair to him. He was a good tenant and he paid his rent. He had gotten the right parking permit. Damn it, he should have that space. What the hell could he do about it, though? The car had to be locked, right? In his dream, yes, damn it, it was a dream, not real. The engine had just started on its own. It was too much to hope that would happen in real life. That meant he would have to get inside by smashing a window or something, and that was destruction of property. Plus, what did he do when he got in there? He was hardly a hot wire kind of guy. Would there be keys in the visor? It was too intense outside to go out there and mess around with the car now anyway, so he forced himself to sit down and watch television. As the night wore on, the wind got worse. The sounds outside the window grew more intense, and at one point, there was thunder and lightning. Try as he might, he could not go to sleep. Now every shadow seemed to show the skeleton man. He was sure the place wasn't haunted, but the car was haunting his mind. When he closed his eyes, he saw it there, the engine running, the lights on, and behind the wheel a shadow that turned into a skeleton the closer you got. He would snap awake and find he was still on the sofa and that the weather person was still on the air. Around 1 a.m, he got up and walked to the window again. The entire landscape was like something out of a sci-fi movie set on an ice planet. The streets were buried in 6 inches at least of snow. The cars were all indistinguishable lumps of white. The sidewalk did not exist. The car was still there. It was coated in ice and snow, but not buried as much as the other ones. In fact, the ground around it appeared not nearly as deep as elsewhere. What the hell did that mean? Was this a devil car, exuding heat whenever it needed to in order to keep the snow off? His mind felt like it was spinning out, and it being the middle of the night was not helping. One's imagination could run wild at 1 a.m. The snow was still intense, but the wind had died a bit. The wind had been blowing so hard it had reached blizzard territory, but now perhaps that stage had passed. He glared at the mystery car. He would be willing to bet money that people on the street who looked out their windows would see the snow, but not the car. No, the car was saved for him alone. Fucking dibs. Fucking bullshit is what it was. Enough was enough. Carl stepped away from the window, put on his boots, got his coat, added a scarf and a winter hat. Then he dug some ski gloves out of the closet and put those on too. Now armed for battle, he headed outside. His mission was simple: figure out a way to move that goddamn car. Was there really a reason for it? No, not really. His car was still blocks away and he was going to have to dig it out. However, when he was done with that task, he wanted the spot that had been given to him and to be able to park in front of his own goddamn house. He also realized he really didn't have anything on him he could use to smash the windows on the fucking car. Damn it. He cursed to himself under his breath. He walked over to the car. It sat there like a lump, the silver from the paint still shining through the glaze of ice and snow. The windows were still somehow foggy, as if ages of dirt had built up on the inside. "Get out of my spot!" He yelled at the car, feeling utterly stupid the moment he did. The last thing he needed was one of his neighbors opening their blinds to see who the hell was yelling, to just see him standing there yelling at a car. Carl walked up to the car and hit the driver's side window with his hand. In the cold, despite his gloves, it hurt like a son of a bitch. All he ended up doing was holding his hand and cursing. Another brilliant move. Madder than ever, he kicked the tire. It did nothing but hurt his toe, but this time he did not scream. Instead, he looked around on the ground. Fortunately, for reasons he could not fathom, the ground around the mystery car was not covered entirely in snow, just another mystery he did not give a shit about. There, a rock. Carl reached down and grabbed a rock just larger than the size of his closed fist. Snarling now, his face already feeling frozen and numb, he turned to face the car. He held the rock high in his right hand, ready to smash the window and deal with the consequences later. The engine burst into life. Carl jumped backwards, hit the curb with the back of his heels, and fell over into the thin layer of snow. He cursed yet again into the cold night. He looked up at the car, wondering what kind of trickery this was. It was just like his dream. It had to have been a dream. He got to his feet and peered into the window. This time there was no shape there, no skeletal figure staring at him. There was a soft amber glow that he guessed was from a light on the dashboard. "What do you want?" he asked the car. "What do you want?" The car door opened. The sound made Carl jump, and when it swung wide, he jumped again. This time he remembered the curb and stepped back onto the lawn. "This can't be happening," he said to no one. Inside, it somehow looked warm. Perhaps that was just an illusion caused by the soft amber light, but he could hear music playing softly, coming from the speakers in the door. That meant the radio was on. "This is a bad idea," he whispered to himself. "This is a bad idea because this cannot be happening." He stepped toward the car door, then took another step. Nothing jumped out, and the door did not slam shut. Carl tried to pull back. It was like something had snagged his midsection and pulled him forward. Sweat broke out on his brow despite the intense cold as he fought the pull. What was influencing him? It could not be good, right? He managed to take one step backwards, but the pull was constant. He felt fear, but there was something else too. Sure, there was the burning curiosity of the situation, but it was more than that. He felt a powerful desire to get into the car. It made no sense, but nothing he told himself could stop his feet from moving. He sat down, pulling his legs inside. Then the door shut. Carl looked to his left and gasped, instinctively reaching for the door handle, only to find there was no door handle inside. Then the lock snapped tight. Carl began to panic, and he pounded at the window. That was when the radio came on full blast.
"You should have let it be. Instead, you had to push it."
The voice was like gravel. Without any rhyme or reason, Carl grabbed the steering wheel, perhaps thinking he could stomp on the gas and drive away. The moment he gripped it, an icy cold unlike anything he had felt before. In fact, he sat bolt upright in the seat, watching as frost appeared across the glass, the dashboard, all over the steering wheel, then his hands and up his wrist. "No," he whispered. "No."
"I have dibs on this spot. Forever. Did you hear me? Forever. You want dibs? Fine. You'll have it with me."
As the laughter of something horrible and demonic burbled out of the radio speakers, Carl watched his arms, elbows, and biceps freeze. The pain was intense, but then the nerve endings died as they froze to death as a cold unlike anything he had ever felt before sank into his skin. He had minutes, maybe seconds. He would become just another forgotten name. He knew that now. People would vaguely remember him sometimes, but no one would know where he had vanished. The car, wherever it was from, would continue to sit here, watching the street. Someday, another man or a woman would finally notice the car and peek inside. That time, 2 skeletons would look back at the person and send them screaming. As the cold washed over his shoulders, up his neck, and then over his head like an ice-cold blanket, he opened his mouth to scream, but he found himself unable to. "Fucking Dibs," was all he could whisper. When the Night Comes Out presents The Basement Game. Tommy was a good kid. That was what his father and mother always said. "Tommy, you're a good kid," one or both of them would say, and then ruffle their fingers through his hair. It wasn't all that hard for him because he just mostly wanted to keep to himself and stay out of trouble. He was also very capable of finding ways to amuse himself and not bug his parents about things. This was especially true now. His family had just moved into a newer, much bigger house than the apartment they had been using before. Although not a mansion, the house contained an attic easily adaptable as a bedroom. The main floor had a living room, dining room, kitchen, family room, and 2 bedrooms. Then there was the basement. His parents, particularly his mom, were focused on unpacking and setting things up. Tommy knew that, of course, and he had already unpacked all of his stuff. It was not a lot since he was just 8 years old, and it had taken him 1 afternoon to get his bedroom set up. So now he was free to explore the house. In fact, his parents encouraged him to. "You should go explore the house," his dad had said. "Then go explore the neighborhood. Now is a good time to make some friends." "Definitely explore the house, but be careful," his mother added the very next day. "The basement is not finished and might still have some old things down there. I know there was a room full of tools from the prior owner, and there might be nails and stuff. We have some boxes down there too, so try not to disturb anything." To ensure he stayed a good kid, he explored the attic first. It was hot as hell up there, but mostly just an open room with a hardwood floor. 2 windows, one overlooking one side of the house and the other over the driveway. 2 doors resembling closets were there. However, the slanted roof left little room in one. The other was just insulation with 2 small boards that led to a window that overlooked the front lawn. That one creeped him out for reasons he couldn't exactly articulate. He found books, lots and lots of books on an old dusty bookshelf in one corner. They were paperbacks and many of them horror books. A pleasant feeling washed over him as he made a mental note to return. Today his mom was in the kitchen. She had carefully wrapped each and every glass, every plate, in brown paper and then into each box. Now she was carefully unwrapping each piece and placing them on the shelves and in the cabinets. "I'm bored," he had told her just that morning. "Have you tried wandering around the neighborhood a bit? Maybe there are other kids here. I'm pretty sure there are." Tommy kicked at the floor. "I don't want to do that." "Have you explored the whole house?" Tommy thought about that. "Not the basement." "Well, there you go," she said, her back turned as she unwrapped another glass. "Just be careful. It's dirty down there and there might be rusty nails and stuff. Just stay out of the newer boxes, too." That was all the conversation he had. The door to the basement was just to the right of the kitchen and down an old rickety set of wooden stairs. It smelled instantly musty, but not in a way that worried him. He expected basements to smell that way. He grabbed the handrail and walked down the stairs, and once there, at the bottom, he found a light switch. To his surprise, a light came on in the middle of the basement. To his left, there were boxes all labeled with stuff from their prior house. He could see the wall and the old wooden door that led into the other workshop from the stairs. To his right was a lot of old junk, and immediately to his right was actually a dusty and cobwebbed bar with old bottles of liquor still on the shelves. His dad was excited about that part of it too, and hoped to finish the whole place and hold parties down here. "Okay, time to play the basement game," he said and rubbed his hands together. All that really meant was to explore everything. Intrigued, he wondered what creepy crawlies might be hiding. He was particularly interested in the stuff at the far end of the basement. There were old wooden pallets there leaning against each other and against the wall. However, as he descended the stairs and got closer to that pile, he saw what appeared to be a door just beyond it. He could only see the top. It was wood, just like the door to his immediate left that led into the old workshop. A hidden door? That was perfect for the basement game. Pretending now he was an ancient explorer about to visit an uncharted island, Tommy moved the pallets around. The pallets were old, and a few of them rotted. They broke apart in his hands and nearly crumbled to dust as he moved them. He also got splinters, and those really hurt. He had to pause several times and remove bits of wood embedded in his palms. Something about the stack of pallets and debris seemed deliberate. Tommy had no idea how he knew that, but there were just so many, and they seemed to serve no other purpose than to try to hide the door. He had only once seen pallets like this before, and it had been in a warehouse. What possible need was there for them in a house's basement? As he moved the heavy pallets into another section of the basement, stacking them along another wall, his thoughts turned to ideas about what treasures might be beyond. Maybe there was a long-forgotten box filled with gold. Or honestly, more valuable to him, a stack of really old comic books that were still in remarkable shape, having been shut off from the world. Now that would really be something. After moving everything, Tommy was sweaty and bleeding in several places on his palms. His mom would be absolutely livid. She'd want to cover it with Bactine, which would sting like hell. Before he revealed his find, though, he had to be a brave explorer and open the door. There was a padlock on the door. His heart sank, but then he looked a bit closer. The lock was very old. It was also very, very rusty. He reached out and touched it, and the whole padlock and lock felt like it was going to fall apart in his hands. He brushed the rust from his hands, then tugged a few times at the padlock part, and it felt like it might move, but the screws holding it into the door frame did not look as rusted away as the rest of the padlock. Tommy stood back and pondered. His eyes turned to the closed workshop door along the wall to his left. He thought again. His mom had told him not to go in there, but he would be quick. There had to be an old hammer or something in there. Maybe if he gave this padlock a few good whacks, it would just fall apart on the floor. Tommy walked across the basement and opened the wooden door along the wall. Immediately, the smell of ancient sawdust filtered into his nose. His mouth opened at the sight. There was a full workbench to his right. There was an old vise, but there were pegs on the wall above, and a hammer, files, a big saw, a smaller hacksaw, and a hand-turned drill. Across from him, stacked along a wall and into the corner, was a big stack of wood. All the wood pieces were different sizes and shapes, but cobwebs covered everything, and Tommy, warned about brown recluse spiders, stayed far away. Right to his left, with the head of it balanced between two hooks, was a hammer. The head looked a bit rusty, but as he picked it up, he could tell it was securely affixed to the handle and still heavy. Tommy was of an age where the thought the hammerhead might explode into fragments never crossed his mind. He was young, and as far as he knew, immortal. He grabbed the hammer and headed back across the basement to the mystery door. "Now I got you," he said to the padlock. He tilted the hammer up over his head and brought it down with as much force as his little body could. He immediately missed and dug a dent into the wooden door. Tommy swore, something he only did when he was alone, and very, very quietly, and looked around as if someone might see. Then he raised the hammer again and tried once more after taking a few practice shots. This time, he hit the lock square on. He heard something crack and lifted the hammer to hit it once more. This time there was a metallic ting, and the rusted lock blew apart and fell to the floor. The rest of the padlock flopped right open and banged against the wood. "Yes!" he cried out in triumph. Tommy dropped the hammer, his attention already gone from that, and focused on the door. Then he ran over, undid the padlock, and grabbed the metal handle and opened the door. There was just a brief instance of resistance from the door, and eventually it swung open toward him. For just a moment, there was a small breeze at his back, as if the room on the other side was some sort of vacuum. It was light and brief, but Tommy did think it was strange. The next thing he couldn't help but notice is how dark it was inside the room. Like, really dark. Like the light was being eaten as it entered the room beyond the door kinda dark. A shiver ran down Tommy's spine as he faced the darkness of the room, a fear he'd never known before settling in his gut. It felt strange. For a moment, it also felt like there might be something inside the room, which was a crazy thought to have, and his dad said people who had crazy thoughts belonged in a special hospital. The light revealed nothing, but maybe a fraction of an inch of a cement floor. No shelves, not another wall, nothing. "Are you a brave explorer or a total wimp?" he asked himself. He was a brave explorer, damn it, and he was sure there had to have been a light switch just inside the door. Once he turned on the light, he would see the size of the room and whether or not the place was empty or filled with treasure. He was hoping for treasure. Tommy took several deep breaths and then stepped over the threshold and into the room. He flung his left hand out to feel along the wall in hope of finding the light switch. He felt cement, so that was a relief. However, as he took another step into the room, all light ceased, and it was like there was a giant hand over his eyes. His heart immediately rocketed to high speeds, and his breath caught in his throat. Find the switch," he whispered. His left hand felt along the wall. Cement. More cement. Damn it, was it on the other side? Cement. Squish. Tommy gasped and pulled his hand away. What the heck was that? He tried to look at his hand, but it was so dark he couldn't even see it when held up in front of his face. "What the?" he managed to say. Then something to his left moved. Then something to his left growled. Tommy opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He backed up toward the door, but it suddenly seemed so far away. The thing moved again. There was a louder growl, and he got the sense something very large was coming toward him. Something flashed amber, 2 of them, and Tommy knew they were eyes. Ma, he stammered, first as a whisper and then a yell. Finally, as the wind brushed against his face, and he knew that the creature in here with him had just taken a swipe at him, the paralysis broke. He found his feet and his voice and ran out of the doorway. Just as he crossed back into the basement, he felt claws brush against his shirt, felt a slight sting as the claws left small scratches, and heard the tearing of fabric. He tripped over his own feet and fell to the floor, immediately flipped on his back and scooted away, eyes wide and staring at the door. "Mom!" he screamed. "Mom!" The doorway was pitch black. He sensed something in there moving, maybe watching, but it did not cross the threshold. Perhaps it couldn't. He heard frantic footsteps run down the stairs. He kept his eyes locked on the doorway, sure that at any moment the creature was going to run out and attack. Only when his mother was standing right near him did he finally get to his feet and run to her, clutching at her legs like a drowning man. Mom, he stammered. Monster, there's a monster! His mom pushed him back a bit and knelt down and enfolded him in her arms. Tommy's sobs subsided in his mother's embrace, and a peaceful quiet settled over him. "Tommy, tell me what happened," she asked. "Did you move all of this around? Why?" So he told her. Stammering and having to start over a few times, he relayed the entire thing. He spun around to show the tears in his shirt and the small scratches. When he was done, he started to cry again. "Oh, Tommy," she said and hugged him again. "Now come on, you know there's no such thing as monsters. Calm down. Shh, calm down. Now look at me." Tommy pulled back and wiped his nose, smearing dirt across his face. His mother had a sympathetic look on her face, but it was the same one she gave him when he said something she knew was wrong. "You went in there, got scared because of the dark, and your mind played tricks on you," she said. "Maybe you tore your shirt on a nail or something out here. Maybe on a ragged edge of one of the pallets?" Tommy shook his head. "No, Mommy, no, it wasn't that, I swear. There's a monster in there." He was about to break again, and his mother shook her head and gave him that look again, and then she did the most horrible thing Tommy could imagine. She walked toward the open door. "Oh, this looks like maybe it's an old root cellar. I bet at one time it was dirt floors and walls or something. People would keep canned stuff in here so it would stay fresh. Someone seems to have cemented over all of that right now." "Mommy, don't!" Tommy cried out, and he ran towards her. She turned back to him. "Tommy, you have to understand, there are no monsters," she said with a smile on her face. "Now you stay right there. Let me show you." "Look at how dark it is," Tommy protested. "Of course it's dark. You just need to turn the light on," his mother replied. "I bet there's a switch on the wall." "I tried that and the monster grabbed me." To his unending horror, she confidently stepped over the threshold and into the darkness beyond. She took one, then another step. The oppressive darkness was so thick, Tommy could barely make out the yellow of her shirt. She turned around, spread her hands out in front of her. "See?" she said. "It's just a room. A dark one, sure, and it's a little creepy, but it's just a room." "Get out, Mommy!" Tommy yelled. "Please! Just let me find a light. There has to be one. There has to." The growl was so loud that Tommy slapped both hands over his ears. He opened his mouth and screamed and screamed. His mother looked surprised. She turned her head to the right and opened her mouth. She screamed too, and it mixed with Tommy's screams. A hand came into view. Green, scaly, rough. The moment the dim light from the basement touched it, it began to smoke, and the growl became a roar. It had 3 fingers and a thumb, each tipped with a long black claw. As his mother's screams got louder than his own, that clawed hand grabbed his mother by the shoulders. Faster than Tommy could blink, something lifted her off the ground and yanked her into the darkness. Tommy saw her legs lifted off the ground, then a brief glimpse of her jeans and shoes, one of which went flying and tumbled out of the room. Tommy just kept screaming and screaming. So did his mother. But then, there was a loud sound that made Tommy sick. A crunching sound. His mother's screams turned into a warbled sort of gurgle that went on and on before there was another crunch, then another, then a bunch more. Tommy found he could not even scream now. He backed away from the door slowly. Tears ran down his dirt-streaked face. The crunching sounds went on, and Tommy put his hands to his ears and clamped down on either side. He kept backing away until the back of his legs hit the steps down into the basement. He sat down hard on his ass. He sat there for a long time with his eyes wide and his hands clamped to the side of his head, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not fully drown out the sounds of eating. Eventually, it did get quiet. So quiet. Tommy couldn't speak. He couldn't say anything, and inside, he couldn't even form a thought. At some point, he plodded up the stairs and into his room. This was where his father would find him eventually when he came home. He would ask Tommy a lot of questions, only to find Tommy was unable to speak. He just stared. Tommy had already arranged his bedroom. He had unpacked just like his parents asked. So he sat down on the bed and stared at the wall. He'd stay there because he was a good boy. Tommy was always a good boy. When the Night Comes Out presents The Last Broadcast. The first thing you should know is that I did not steal the television. It was abandoned. The entire fucking town had been deserted since the 60s, for crying out loud. Anyway, I'll get more into detail about that later. I run a unique sort of store where I find things, fix them up, then sell them. Some call it an antique store, but I do a lot more than just that. An average antique store has things that are either already working or just broken and meant for decoration. So now that we've established my store, Past Perfect, is not just an antique store, let me tell you about the town of Raven's Rest. Yeah, right out of an Edgar Allan Poe story. I know it sounds weird, but the entire town is weird in a way. Maybe some of you out there remember the story of Raven's Rest, but it happened in the 70s, and that probably means so many of you do not. So, Raven's Rest was this nice little town in Pennsylvania. Thriving, in a way, and most of the people worked in a nearby quarry. Then, one day, people started getting sick, and they finally discovered the water was poisoned. Like, it was so much poison they all had to leave right away. All that means is there is an entire town fenced off, slowly rotting away. For decades. I knew about it, the people around me knew about it. It was the ghost town, and when you were a kid, you dared each other to even try to get in there and look around. I carried the rumor that the whole place was poisoned until adulthood. Until a few weeks ago, actually. I read that they planned to flatten the town, and I was shocked. How could they flatten the town and build something over it when the ground was poison? Then I read that the problem was the water, and they'd worked hard to fix the town's poisoning. As soon as that was solved, I knew someone would buy the place, flatten it, and build condos. All of that to say, I found the television there, in Raven's Rest, in one of the houses. Once I knew that the place was going to be demolished, I called up my friend Mo. I knew I had to get through there as much as I could. As I said, people had to abandon their belongings, so I knew I could find things to grab, fix, and sell. Mo was down for it, so we got the pickup truck and made sure we had our weight belts and the straps we used to make carrying large and heavy things easier, and headed to the town. There's a lot of things you might find boring when it comes to this kind of scavenging. I will spare you those details. We got there, explored some houses, I found a few things, an old clock, an even older radio, a record player, and we put them into the truck. Then we drove on and finally came to the largest house in the entire town. This was quite the house. I don't know who lived there, but it was huge. 3 floors plus a basement. The lawn surprisingly wasn't as overgrown as the others. It was kind of freaky, like maybe ghosts were still out there doing gardening and mowing the grass. The house's windows were broken, but otherwise it was in pretty good shape from the outside. Once we got inside, we found that this was a facade. The second floor had collapsed into the first in a few places. Somehow there was junk piled up everywhere. I wondered if kids or other people were using it for doing drugs, making out, having teen sex, and as a kind of garbage dump. Most of the trash piled up there didn't match the house's abandonment date. Fortunately, Mo and I, who had experience with this sort of thing, had gloves and masks. We did not have full hazmat suits, but we did our best to keep our flesh covered so there was less likelihood of being scratched or cut. In more than one instance, we discovered that these homes had been used as drug dens and remained littered with old, used needles. We found the television in the basement. Mo and I spent some time upstairs, but the stairs leading to the second and third floors were very rickety and dangerous, so we didn't really get up there. Downstairs, on the first floor, it was just junk. It took a moment to find the door to the basement and had to clear away some junk, but once it opened, it was right out of a haunted house story. Even with the masks on, we could smell how old and musty it was. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and you could tell that even from the top of the stairs. This had put most people off, but my heart started racing in excitement. Maybe because the place had fallen into disrepair and someone had blocked the door. Or maybe because someone had declared this place haunted ages ago. It was obvious no one had entered the darkness. It smelled musty, but also earthy, too. The stairs looked wobbly, but also capable of supporting weight, so Mo and I made our way down slowly. Sure enough, when we got down there, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Someone had once finished the basement. Against one wall was an old oak bar, now covered in mold. There were still bottles and glasses on the wall behind it, but the liquor in each had turned into muck ages ago. There was an old rotting sofa with weeds growing out of holes in the back and along the armrests. Then, against the wall, was my prize. It was a cabinet television. Made from wood, and with the cabinet doors closed at the moment, it looked in pristine condition. I could not, from the stairs, see any mold or wear on it. It was also quite large, unusual for the time of its manufacture and use. I guessed it was the 50s, but I wasn't sure if it was early or late. For the time, the screen on this one must have seemed gigantic. "Would you look at that?" I asked excitedly and ran down the last few steps and over to the cabinet. I knelt down and slowly opened the doors. Sure enough, there was a 12-inch screen. The knobs and buttons were all there, and no animal jumped out at me for disturbing their nest. I gently touched the screen, which had a green tinge to it, and then the controls. No remote control for this one. I was dying to dig into the guts in the back and see if there were any working vacuum tubes and if all of the wires were there. "We have to take this," I said. Mo just nodded. "I don't think it's gonna work." "Well, no, but that's kind of my thing," I replied. "I take these old things and mess with them until they work in some fashion. I mean, all of the TV signals went digital years ago, so even if it worked, it wouldn't pick up any broadcasts." "Hey, whatever you want to do," Mo said, already affixing the straps underneath the television. "Just be careful with this," I said, whispering in reverence. "I haven't seen one of these in this kind of condition in ages. It's going to be heavy as fuck and brittle in a lot of ways. Let's try not to ding it." We got the straps under it, and the fucker was really heavy. I mean, this felt like 2-ton weights, and getting it up the stairs was a chore I would not recommend. Also, given how fragile it was, we had to carry it up those stairs and through that chaotic house like it was a bomb. Somehow, we got it to the truck and strapped it down. I had completed my work for the day, but spent a little more time exploring other houses. There wasn't much worthwhile anywhere else. I was dying to get the television home and start poking around to see what worked and what didn't. See, there was a market for stuff like this. Many people had taken old TVs and updated the interior to accept the digital broadcasts of today, and even installed a kind of flat screen in there, while maintaining that bubble-like screen that the old TVs had. It was a real conversation starter for most people, and I was dying to dig in. I got back to my shop and had Mo help me lift the television onto my workbench. I adjusted the chair so I could look right into the screen. Mo hovered for a moment until I paid him for the help, and then I went back to my workbench. I gathered up my tools and went back to the TV set. I studied the front, did some cursory cleaning on places that needed it. Then I opened the back. I was half expecting this to be the time some animal would jump out at me, but instead I gasped for a whole different reason. I gasped because the interior of this television looked almost brand new. I had expected the vacuum tubes to be black and burned out ages ago. I had a basket filled with tubes next to me. Sure, I had one that would work, but these were all pristine. The wiring I expected to have corroded and broken apart into a million pieces, but other than some slight yellowing on parts of the wiring that would have normally been white, it was all perfect. "I'll be goddamned," I whispered. I did some checks of the wiring and found that a current could run through it. It would not burst into flames if I plugged it in and turned it on. I studied the cord that ran to the wall, expecting to find parts where rodents had chewed through it. Nope. All perfect. Now I felt excited. I plugged the cord into the wall. I walked back to the TV set with anticipation. The world of TV went all digital in 2009. However, I had heard there were still some pirate TV stations out there using lower power analog TV to put out shows and whatnot. It was still illegal, but there were only a few analog TVs left anymore, and most of those had purchased converter boxes ages ago. In short, I was not expecting to get much. Also, this damn set was from the time when people had huge antennas on their rooftops, so there weren't even a pair of rabbit ears. My plan wasn't to sell this for standard TV use or its intended purpose. I had planned to rip most of the guts out, save most of that for spare parts, add a digital screen, and put a dome-like piece of glass over it, disguise the flat screen, and then bingo, it would be an interesting conversation for some diehard for their next party. I sat down with eager, shaking hands in front of the set, and I turned the on-off knob. There was a satisfying click, and then the sound, high-pitched, right into the ears as the tubes and wires kicked into life. I lingered, poised to react if things went wrong. That did not happen. Those old tubes take a long time to fire up, but they did. I watched the screen while waiting, questioning the picture tube's functionality, age, and condition. However, to my delight, the screen did pop to life and began to glow right in my face. Ha ha ha! I yelled. I even clapped my hands. Unbelievable! It was static, of course, as I thought it might be. Still, it was working. I rummaged around in my room and found an old pair of rabbit ear antennas. I managed to hook it up to the ancient TV and set them atop the cabinet. Then I began turning the channels. Static, 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 static. All of the major VHF channels were just static. That made sense, as those would likely be owned by the big broadcast company. So I flicked over to the UHF channels. I began flipping through those. Static, 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 but with an image. Well, hello there, I said, the smile on my face as wide as possible. Did I just find me a pirate station? I could just barely make out an image. It was a static image, if you can pardon that weird pun, and I couldn't make much out. I immediately began adjusting the gain and the set itself. Those old over-the-air TV sets allowed you to try and fine-tune the signal so you could get them in clearer. To my amazement, the image did get clearer the more I adjusted. It was like defusing a bomb, at least to me. I moved those knobs so slowly, and whenever I went too far and the image went sideways, I adjusted them back the other way. Slowly, the image took shape. When it did, I sat back and stared. Huh, was my brilliant reaction. It was in black and white, of course, but it was also what appeared to be a living room. There was the sofa, the easy chair, the coffee table. In the background was a dining room table. There was an oval carpet on the floor of the living room and a bookshelf off to the left. The angle of the image was high up, just above the heads of the people. Yes, there were people there too. They all wore clothing reminiscent of 1950s mannequins. The dad read a newspaper and had a pipe in his mouth in the easy chair. The mom, her hair piled quite high on her head, was in a perfect dress, complete with apron, and doing what appeared to be knitting on the sofa. Sitting on the floor cross-legged, as if watching this very television, was a young boy with a white shirt, hard to tell on a black and white TV, I know, and a crew cut. He had a big smile on his face. Finally, sitting on the floor beside the coffee table was a young girl with her hair in pigtails and also wearing a dress. She held a doll in her hand. It was so stereotypical I nearly laughed. I leaned closer to the screen. Was this a painting? A photograph just held up in front of a camera from somewhere? There was something off. Something about the people there just seemed weird. I shivered and adjusted the image a bit more. I was trying to discern more of the image. Something else, but there was nothing. I decided it was a pirate broadcast and this was some kind of placeholder. Maybe at different times this vanished and an actual TV show appeared. I wished at that time I knew the schedule for that because I would have liked to have seen it. I decided that it must have been an old photograph or a drawing or painting, and that was why it was somehow just weird. The proportions or something seem off, I whispered. It just looks weird. Damn it, I wish I could describe it better. My test was done, and since it was creepy, I turned the dial and shut off the TV. The image vanished into a tiny white dot and then disappeared. I felt much better about the whole thing instantly and set about cleaning up the rest of the TV. I got lost in the task and was soon whistling. The next day, I was excited to get back to work. I had spent a lot of time with the TV the night before, so I looked at some of the other things I had picked up. A few of them turned out to be junk, broken and battered beyond repair. However, a few of the items I felt I could salvage, maybe turn into something else like a planter or some kind of wall art. One never knew what people who like to buy these things would think or do with the stuff they bought. It was just after lunch when I finally returned to my prize. I was so excited. I wondered if maybe the pirate station might have some actual programming on. I sat down on my bench, opened the door, and turned the knob. Once again, it took a few moments, but then the screen came to life. It was the same image as I had seen the night before. I admit something instantly creeped me out, and I was more than a little disappointed. However, just like the night before, something about it grabbed my attention, seemed to force me to look closer, deeper. Something was different. I could now see more of the house. I could see the dining room table more clearly. I could see a window back there and the flowers growing in a box beneath those windows just beyond. I could see the archway on the right side and into the kitchen now, the old 1950s appliances partially visible. I said to no one. Maybe they had done a broadcast the night before and now the image, the photo or painting, was back in front of the camera, but closer or focused better. I leaned down and studied it a bit closer. Of course, with most TV sets, especially ones this old, the closer you got, the less you could see. I leaned back and studied the image again. Yes, I could definitely see more of the house. The family was still in the same spot they had been. Wait. No, that wasn't quite the case. I leaned forward again, losing the definition. I adjusted myself so I could be as close as possible and still see. The daughter's head had moved. Just slightly. She was no longer looking at the doll in her hand. Instead, she had tilted her head a bit, and her eyes, well, were looking right at me. Well, of course, they were looking at whatever camera had taken that image, but it appeared like she was looking straight at me. I felt a chill run down my spine and then back up again. I shivered. "You're crazy," I said, once again to no one. I cleaned off the screen again, then spent a little more time just making sure everything was working. I had plans to rip some of the guts out very carefully and put in more modern stuff, but something just would not let me do that. I was now fascinated by the possibility that there was a pirate TV station nearby, something that would show something. I debated whether to keep the TV on. The set was so old I didn't want to burn out the tubes or anything, but I also was hoping to catch something happening on the pirate station. I decided to leave it on while I worked, but that I would stay nearby and make sure it wasn't overheating. I turned my attention to an old radio I had found. I took out the guts, added some Bluetooth stuff I had around, and soon it was an antique-looking radio with Bluetooth capabilities so someone could use it at their next party. My next object was the really old record player. Adding some Bluetooth to that was also a popular thing these days. You could also add a USB port and make it so you could convert old vinyl records into MP3s. This was going to take some doing and a lot more work, so I was quickly involved with all of that. At some point, I leaned back and cracked my back, removed the magnifying glasses I had been wearing to do some soldering and wire work, and rubbed my eyes. I turned around and gasped. The image had changed again. It wasn't a lot. Just like before, if you didn't know what to look for, you could miss it. However, I could distinctly see that the little girl in the image was definitely now staring straight into the camera. At the same time, her brother, I was assuming it was her brother, had also turned his head and was casting a sideways glance upwards toward the camera as well. Meanwhile, the mom had put her knitting down a bit and appeared to be looking at her daughter. If there had been a pirate broadcast, it had not made any noise. I checked the volume and saw that it was up. Yesterday, the speakers had exploded with white noise from the static, so I knew they worked. I suddenly got the very distinct feeling that the people in the image knew I was there, and they were looking at me. You are losing it, Jesus. Stop trying to scare yourself, idiot. Still, I got closer to the TV. I got as close as I could without it becoming all pixels and nonsense. Yeah, there was no doubt about the fact the figures in the image had moved. It was creepy as fuck, I gotta tell you. The sister's eyes bore right into the camera. It made no sense, of course, that there would be a camera, unless this was a static image someone had in front of a goddamn camera. Her eyes bore right into mine, and she did not look happy. In fact, she looked rather pissed off. I shivered from my head to my toe. I walked over and turned the TV off. Fuck this thing. I would not let it creep me out. In fact, damn it, I was gonna rip its guts out now, use what I could for spare parts, and start modifying it. I walked over to my tool bench and grabbed the tools I would need, turned toward the TV. When I looked up, I was sitting on the stool, open-mouthed. The TV was on again, and the tools I had grabbed were on the table. The creepy image was there, only this time, now the son and daughter were both looking at me, and the wife had turned her head too. The dad had also lowered his newspaper, but he appeared to be looking at his family, and not me. What the fuck? My head was buzzing. I felt as if I had been on a bit of a bender. I stood up and immediately almost fell over. I cast another glance at that creepy image, and once again shivered. I grabbed my tools again, and this time started walking around the table to the back of the TV. When I came to, it was 3 hours later. In fact, the sun had gone down, and my shop was very dark, save for the light of the television screen. The buzzing in my head was very loud now. It felt as if a radio inside my skull was tuned between stations. Sure enough, the scene on the screen had changed. Now all 4 family members had turned their heads and were looking straight at me, at the camera. Fuck, it was me. I knew it as sure as I was standing there. They were somehow looking at me. I had no memory of anything that had happened in the intervening hours. All I knew was that it seemed as if I was unable to take the thing apart. There was a desire to do it, but I simply would not be allowed to destroy this thing. Oh, fuck this right off, I said. No, I do not believe in haunted fucking objects like this. I decided to unplug the thing and get rid of it. I know I said I loved it, and I did, but apparently there was something really wrong with it. I unplugged it and then got one of the straps to help me lift the damn thing. It was hugely heavy, and it took me half an hour just to get it up the stairs. I kept having to stop and catch my breath, let my heart rate get back to normal. I finally got it out into the alley and left it beside the dumpster. The earlier rain had wet the ground, and I figured that would start rotting the wood. As soon as I had it there, a thought erupted into my brain like fireworks. Burn it. It was tempting. I could put it into the dumpster and douse it with any number of things that would light. I would leave it burning in the dumpster, a literal dumpster fire. No, that was too much. The garbage guys would come tomorrow and toss it into a truck, and it would end up at a dump. The rats could eat it for all I cared. I brushed dirt off my hands and marched back into my house, up to my room. I crawled into bed and fell asleep almost instantly, relieved I had gotten rid of the weirdness. I would make money on the other things I had brought back from the town. I awoke with a start at 3 a.m. on the button. The light in my room confused me. I always make sure my room is completely dark. For a moment, I was unsure where I was, and then I looked at the foot of my bed. I screamed. The TV was there, and the cabinet was open, the plug snaked to the outlet on the wall. The image of the family was there, and all of them now looked right at me, and they had shifted their positions. It looked like the daughter and son were getting to their feet, and the dad had put down his newspaper. He also looked furious, the pipe clenched in his teeth. "No!" I cried out, and then I realized my sheets were wet. A moment after that, I realized my hands and feet were the cause of the wetness. I looked down at my hands. They were scraped, cut, and wet. My feet were muddy. I had gone outside and grabbed the set and brought it back inside, in my goddamn sleep. "Fuck you!" I screamed at the set. The image of the family, still in black and white, did not move. However, I soon realized what else about the image had probably set me off. It was the house. The goddamn house. I realized the house they sat in was the same fucking house where I had found the TV set in the basement. I sat there paralyzed with fear. I had no idea what to do. If this thing had some power over me that prevented me from destroying it and also prevented me from throwing it away, then what could I do? Sure, I could try to burn it, but I feared I would black out and wake up to find my room on fire and my own clothes catching while that goddamn television sat there untouched with the family grinning at me. I slowly got up and out of bed. I grabbed a blanket and a pillow. I decided I needed to sleep the rest of the night and try to figure something out in the morning. I shut my bedroom door and set up a makeshift bed on my sofa. I made absolutely sure my television in there was off, and then laid back down. I woke up to sunlight on my face. I startled awake with a terrible dream of grinning faces with sharpened teeth. I was at least still on my sofa and in my living room. I felt a sense of relief at that. I got up and poured myself some cereal in the kitchen. I kept looking back at the doorway that led to my bedroom. I didn't live in a particularly large apartment, so it wasn't too far out of sight. I could almost feel this tugging at the back of my brain, as if the people within the television were talking to me, trying to get me to walk in there, sit on the floor, and just stare at the image. I ate my cereal and sat at the kitchen table. I was delaying the inevitable. I had to go back into my bedroom at some point. I got up, walked slowly down the hall, grabbed the doorknob, and slowly turned it and opened the door. Sure enough, there was a glow from the TV. I mean, I hadn't turned it off, but my wish that the bulb or tubes would burn out had not come true. As soon as I opened the door, I gasped. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I was sure that the entire family from within the image on the TV was in my room. All 4 of them there staring at me, their teeth bared. It was just a flash, quicker than lightning, and then it was gone. It was, however, enough to set my heart racing. With that terror gone, now came the next. I could feel this pull. A pull inside my head, like a hand was in there controlling me, telling me to come sit down, watch the TV, watch the TV. My feet started to move, and I did not recall consciously asking them to do so. Before long, I was in front of the end of the bed. I sat down, crossing my legs like I used to do when I was a kid. I stared wide-eyed into the screen. Sure enough, the entire family was on their feet, all of them in a tight group, hands out slightly, fingers curled into claws. They all had smiles on their faces, but it did not give off anything close to happiness. The smiles were outright evil. They were all in front of the coffee table, looking up at the camera. A black bar came down from the top of the screen, something that happened a lot with these old TVs. This time, it seemed to wipe the image clean. When it was gone, they had all moved closer, and now their lips were parted. Their teeth were like daggers. "No," I said, and I tried to get up, but my legs would not move. Instead, I reached for my phone in my pocket, and I started recording this. I can't move. My legs have cramped up, and I can't straighten them. Every few moments, one of those black bars comes down, and they get closer. The family gets closer, and the closer they get, the less they look like people and more like demons. There's no answers here. I am just a guy who found an old TV in an old house. I don't know if this thing is cursed or demonic or what. In the real world, there are no easy answers. I do know, somehow, with increasing certainty, that they will get closer enough to fill the screen with their faces, and then they'll reach right out at me with their claw-like hands. What happens then? I don't know. I just wanted to find something special. Instead, I found this. I hope someone listens to this. I am so scared. Months later, after not paying his rent in just as many months, his landlord used his key to enter the apartment. He found it sterile, as if his resident had just picked up and left without notice and in a hurry. He never thought this guy would be a deadbeat. He wandered through the living room, then the kitchen. Food had gone bad in the fridge, and he wrinkled his nose before checking out the bathroom. Then finally, he stepped into the bedroom. It was empty. There was, however, a really old television up against the wall. It was on, but from this angle, he could not see the image. Weird. He didn't think these old TVs worked anymore. There was a cell phone on the floor and some small stains near it. He stepped closer and saw that maybe the stains were blood? He bent down and grabbed the phone. It still had a bit of a charge, and when he swiped it, it opened without a password request. It appeared his former resident had recorded a video as his face was frozen there on the screen. His eyes looked terrified. Puzzled, he pushed the play button. The first thing you should know is that I did not steal the television. It was abandoned. The entire fucking town had been abandoned since the 60s. He lifted his head as his former resident continued to talk about the television. That was when the image on the screen caught his eyes. A family. Father, mother, son, daughter, and perhaps an uncle? All of them wearing old clothes and sitting around a coffee table. A black line came down from the top of the screen, and the image shifted, changed. The man he assumed was an uncle had turned his head, was now looking right at him. The landlord peered closer. Yes, he was sure of it. It was his former resident. He opened his mouth and screamed. When the Night Comes Out presents It Wears a Face. They came from all around because it was story time. However, this time it was special. Not only was it Friday the 13th, which made it extra creepy, but Dennis was going to be there, and everyone knew he was the one with the best creepy stories. He wasn't always there during summer camp, but he had been here this year, his long, lanky frame easy to spot among the smaller campers, and he was always the most fun. Most importantly, he was the one everyone knew who did the ghost stories on the Friday before the last weekend of camp and told the best stories. The date was a coincidence, but so many of them had been going around making the soundtrack sounds from the movie franchise, the woods constantly echoed with the kill, kill, kill. Ha, ha, ha. It sort of drove the rest of the camp counselors a bit crazy, but in the end, it was good fun, and even the more veteran of them still liked to hear the stories, and of course, they all knew Dennis told the best ones. Dennis was heading into his last few years of being eligible for the head counselor at the camp. Just another year after this one, and he had skipped last year to the disappointment of that crop of campers. He was back, and everyone hoped he had a whopper of a story to tell. Dennis was so special, he also got his own cabin, which put him above everyone. The storytelling day was a tradition that went back as far as Camp Silver Lake had first existed, which was back in the late 50s. It went co-ed in the late 70s, and it turned out the girls had great stories too. Counselors gathered campers around the fire pit's stone amphitheater, built by the camp founders, and told scary stories. Some campers also told stories, and the best storyteller received a ribbon. It was summer, of course, so it seemed to take more time for the sun to go down, and everyone knew the stories would not come until it was suitably dark. So once the sun went behind the trees, with dinner in the past and the daily activities put away, they all came down with their flashlights and began to sit around the newly formed fire. Margie, the female head counselor, was there, and like tradition said, she was wearing a long black robe with a hood and a flashlight beneath her chin to be extra creepy. "Welcome, Silver Lakers. Please come in," she said in her spookiest voice. "Have a seat." They all did. Was this corny as hell? Yes. Would it be something all of them would make fun of under any other situation? Hell yes. Did any of them care? Not a single one. "I don't even want to waste another moment," Margie said. "Too late," someone called out from the audience, and everyone laughed. Margie smiled and waited. "You all know who's here," Margie credited. "It's Dennis. Let's bring him up now since none of us can follow him and none of us want to wait." Margie gave a dramatic flourish with her hand and robe, and the audience burst into applause. Dennis seemed to materialize out of the shadows at the end of the stage. He wore his own robe, and he spun with it and then bowed dramatically. Thank you, thank you." He unbuttoned the robe and tossed it into the crowd. "It's too damn hot for that," he said, and there was more laughter. Dennis was quite the sight in the firelight. All long limbs and wisps of a beard and mustache. His brown hair was always a bit of a mess, and his glasses only reflected the orange of the flames as he sat down on the stone stool where the storyteller sat. He clapped his hands loudly and then spread them as if commanding the fire. Did the fire seem to grow a little more with that, or were they all imagining? "Are you ready?" Of course they were, and said so. "Then buckle up. Stay close. Lovers, hold each other close. As this darkness enfolds us, let me tell you the most terrifying story I've ever yet come across." It was total silence now. Dennis leaned forward and began to speak. Maddie Davis was a single mom. Her daughter, Dee Dee, was 3.5 and more than advanced for her age. At times, she creeped Maddie out with how much she seemed to know and how she spoke. Her daughter was also a handful, but Maddie was doing her best and had a good job, and this allowed them to live in a nice little house bought in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The house was 2 bedrooms and needed some work, and Maddie did her best on weekends to make it more like their home. Dee Dee did her best to help too, but mostly she just ran her mouth, talking about anything and everything. The depths of her imagination never failed to amaze Maddie. As for the dad, well, that son of a bitch had run away before Dee Dee was even born. Maddie had no clue where he was now and didn't care. She had her daughter, they had their life, and things were good. Until the night Dee Dee woke Maddie up from a deep sleep, screaming, "Mommy! Mommy!" There was very little that could turn a person's blood to ice and cause them to leap into action from deep sleep to running than a child's scream. Maddie, her eyes half open, her long t-shirt hiked up too high, and her bare feet scrambling for purchase on the well-worn carpet. Damn it, she needs to replace that sometime. She ran for the bedroom. Because of the house's layout, Dee Dee's bedroom was slightly down the hall, and she staggered into a wall, reaching it in 10 seconds. Dee Dee was sitting up, her blankets and her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, eyes wide. She pointed to the wall across the way from the bed, but slightly up. Maddie turned on the lights, and Dee Dee unclutched everything and ran across her bed and into her mother's arms. Maddie held her tight, but the little girl was shaking, and the tears quickly stained her nightshirt. "What's the matter?" Maddie asked. "What's going on? Dee Dee?" Dee Dee pointed again, and this time Maddie could follow her finger. It wasn't the wall, but the vent at the top of the wall near the ceiling. It was a standard AC vent, and there was nothing there she could see. "There's a man in there!" Dee Dee screamed. "He whispered, Mommy! He whispered!" Maddie held her daughter on the edge of the bed and rocked her the way she had when she was an infant. "Shh," she said, her eyes going to the vent again and again. Nothing there that she could see. The whole vent beyond the grate would be very small anyway. Dee Dee finally calmed down and was just sniffling now. "Can I come sleep with you?" Her little girl had already been through that phase, and Maddie almost said no, but her daughter's expression was too much for her to resist. Of course you can, baby. I just think you had a nightmare. What was the man whispering? He said he had something to show me, Dee Dee said. Sussing about a face. Maddie frowned. Well, that was weird, and not exactly what she thought she might hear. Okay, well, we can talk more about it in the morning, Maddie said, wiping hair out of her daughter's face and then kissing her forehead. Come on, come sleep in my bed tonight, okay? Maddie carried Dee Dee to her bedroom, tucked them both in, and Dee Dee fell asleep on her chest. Maddie continued gently stroking her hair, but she kept staring at the ceiling. A whispering man. That was a new one. Dee Dee had had an aversion to the dark, hence her nightlight in her room. She also disliked thunderstorms, and at one time believed something was hiding under her bed. She had overcome all those fears one by one, so this was surprising and a new topic. It took a while, but eventually Maddie dozed off, her dreams troubled. Things got back to normal, for a while. Dee Dee was quiet the next morning and agreed that it was probably a bad dream. Although she seemed tired and her eyes looked heavy during breakfast, by the time she was at daycare, it seemed like all was well. She ran to the playground and was as energetic as ever. If only I had the stamina and energy of a 3-year-old, Maddie thought. And things were normal for a few days. Then suddenly, on a random Friday, Dee Dee started screaming again. Maddie had a harder time climbing out of her dream because her dream absorbed the scream, and when she finally did wake up, the world was blurry and she was groggy. When she got out of bed, she staggered, her feet not getting the message she was awake. Mommy! I'm coming. She got moving now and was there as quickly as she could, and Dee Dee was once again clinging to her rabbit and the blanket and pointing to the wall. Her eyes were wide with terror, and tears flowed from her face. He's back! The man! Maddie gathered Dee Dee up in her arms again and looked at the vent. Once again, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Did he whisper again? Dee Dee just nodded. I saw his eyes. You saw his eyes? Where? At the vent? Dee Dee nodded again. Yeah. Maddie frowned. Again, the nature of the nightmare was strange. This wasn't a boogeyman under the bed or ghosts in the closet. Do you want Mommy to check? Dee Dee nodded. Be careful, he's mean. Maddie gently disengaged from Dee Dee and walked across the room. Although she knew this was crazy, she couldn't help but feel dread as she padded across the thick carpeting to stand just below the vent. She peered up at it, unable to see directly in, and couldn't see anything, but there was a weird feeling inside of her. She stood on her tiptoes and tried to peer in, but the vent was still above her, and for just a moment, a fraction of a second, she thought she heard something. Breathing, maybe? Then the AC kicked on, and cool air blew into her face, and she laughed at herself. I don't see anything, sweetie, Maddie said. If he was in there, he's gone. She turned around to look at her daughter, and Dee Dee's big eyes and even bigger tears and frightened face melted her heart. She had errands to run and could sleep in a bit, so... Come on, come sleep in my room, she said. Dee Dee jumped out of bed and took her hand, and they were soon asleep under the covers. Maddie once again had a harder time falling asleep, and at one point, she was sure she heard something walking around in the house. She managed to convince herself it was all in her mind, just the house settling, and eventually, sleep took her. Once again, things went back to normal for 2 days. On the third, about 3 a.m, Dee Dee just ran into her mother's bedroom, screaming the entire way. Maddie woke up, slightly irritated now. There are times when a parent has just about enough of their kids. You love them, of course, but every human being has their breaking point. Maddie had not been sleeping well, even on the nights Dee Dee had been sleeping. Dee Dee, stop screaming, she said a little too harshly as she woke up. Dee looked as if she had been slapped. She stopped dead, the look of terror on her face and eyes wide. "I'm sorry, Mommy." Dee slipping into that baby talk made her worried. She was always ahead of the curve on her speech, including using contractions. Maddie scolded herself as she sat up and hugged her daughter. "No, baby, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped. You just scared me too. Forgive me?" "Uh-huh." Was it the man again? "Uh-huh." Did you see his eyes in the vent again? "Nuh-uh." Maddie's eyes widened slightly. "What did you see? Was he still whispering?" "I saw his face." Now Maddie pulled Dee away from her chest to look in her eyes. "Dee, how did you see his face?" "He pushed his face out of the thing," Dee said, pointing to the corresponding vent in Maddie's room. "Mommy, it wears a face." Maddie was now totally confused. "It? And what do you mean?" "I don't think it's a man," Dee said, her voice earnest. That spooky way she had of speaking more like a woman in her 20s or 30s than someone too young for kindergarten. "And it wears a face. It has a face, but it doesn't belong to it." "Like a mask?" Maddie asked. "Like Halloween?" Dee nodded. "Kinda, but it's real. Just not its own face." Maddie had no idea what her daughter meant, but it scared her anyway. She picked Dee up and put her in bed and made sure she was snug. Eventually, despite the terror and the tears, she fell asleep. Maddie got out of bed and walked to her daughter's room. She turned on the light, but saw nothing. She once again padded over to the vent, and this time, she grabbed one of the small chairs her daughter had for a tiny desk she loved to use for drawing. Now she was face to face with the vent, and she stood on her tiptoes once again and peered into the vent. She saw only darkness. A soft breeze blew Maddie's hair back a bit. Turning her head, she put her ear by the vent and heard the air from the air conditioner. And then she heard a very slight sound that, to her, resembled a kind of sigh. Or perhaps a grunt of effort, like someone trying to do something that caused them strain. It was soft, and just for a mere fraction of a second. Maddie pulled back, but quickly lost her balance on the tiny chair. The chair tipped over, and she tumbled back, hitting the backs of her knees against Dee's bed, and she fell on it. She slapped her hand on her mouth so she didn't cry out, and then her eyes once again cast up to the vent. Eyes looked back at her, and she nearly screamed again. Then she blinked, and the image was gone. Maddie rubbed the back of her legs, and when she was able, she ran out of the room, closed the door behind her, and climbed back into her own bed. Dee stirred but did not wake up. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and held her daughter. "Everything is okay," she whispered, and it was more for herself than her daughter. "Everything is okay." Dee slept for the next 2 nights in Maddie's room, and she did not complain. Maddie was having trouble sleeping now. One night, she thought she heard something coming from her daughter's room, and then what sounded like footsteps across the floor. For a moment, her eyes barely open. She thought she saw a white face peeking around the edge of the door to her own room. She shut her eyes and counted to 10, and when she opened them wide, there was nothing. Sleep paralysis, she told herself. Eventually, Dee did head back into her room, but the atmosphere within the house changed. Maddie was irritable, and she snapped more than once, then had to cradle her child in her arms and soothe her. She also snapped at work and had to apologize. Strange images of creatures with huge fangs and people hiding behind masks of human flesh filled her dreams. Finally, Maddie told Dee she should sleep in her own bed. Her daughter began to cry and wail and carry on, and after days of not sleeping, Maddie had had about enough. "You need to be a big girl and sleep in your own bed," she barked. "You can't let nightmares cause you to sleep your entire life in bed with your mother." "They are not nightmares!" Dee screamed. There's a thing! It wears a face! Stop saying that, Maddie said. You have to stop. Dee Dee began to cry, and Maddie was too tired to listen. She picked her up, and she increased her volume and began kicking. Maddie took her daughter into her bedroom and put her in the bed. Stay in here, Maddie said. If you close your eyes and relax, you'll go to sleep. Mom! Mommy! Stop it, Maddie yelled, her head pounding. Dee Dee stopped screaming and just cried silently, her eyes wide like something out of a Japanese anime film. Maddie instantly felt bad for what she did, for yelling, and her heart broke. Despite her abilities that made her seem older, even Maddie sometimes forgot Dee Dee was just a toddler, basically. She was young. I'm sorry, Maddie said. I'm sorry, baby. Please, I just haven't slept, and Mommy has such a headache. Can you at least try? Please? Dee Dee nodded, but the hurt on her face was too intense, and Maddie still felt like the Wicked Witch. She climbed under her blankets and grabbed her bunny and turned away from Maddie, and she felt her heart break yet again. She realized she had betrayed her baby's trust in her, maybe for the first time, and she wanted to sit down and wail as well. Instead, she stayed in Dee Dee's room until the little girl was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling, soft snores emerging from her side of the bed. Then Maddie padded down the hall and climbed into her own bed. She felt the guilt would overwhelm her and she'd never sleep, but to her surprise, she fell right down into darkness and dreams. Until 3 a.m, on the dot. There was a scream from Dee Dee's room. Not crying. She did not call Maddie's name or cry for her mommy. There was a scream. It was short, cut off, and Maddie was awake, but her brain still hazy. Had she dreamed it? Dee Dee? She called out. There was nothing. Maddie swung her legs over the side of the bed. She stood up and felt dizzy for a moment. When she was steady, she walked to her door and peeked her head out into the hallway. Had she heard something then? Yes, soft. Something coming from Dee Dee's room. Dee Dee, she called out. Are you okay? As she neared her daughter's room, she realized what it was. Dee Dee was crying. The lump under the blankets faced the wall, the covers pulled up, and the bunny barely visible over her shoulder. She was sobbing. Maddie entered the room, and a foul smell hit her. Coppery, but also sort of rotten. Dee Dee, what happened? Maddie asked. She continued to sob. Maddie walked to her daughter's bed and climbed into it. She reached out to touch her daughter's shoulder. It was wet. Dee Dee, what the hell? Maddie pulled her hand back and put it up in front of her face. Her hand was red. Maddie whipped her head around, and now the sound coming from the form she thought was her daughter was not sobbing. No, it was laughing. Terrible, horrible laughing that was far from human. The figure moved, got longer, extended its legs, and turned toward Maddie. When its head finally came around so it could look Maddie in the eye, she felt her sanity slip within her mind. Slip and then fall away. It wore a face. Her daughter's face. Blood covered the creature, and its face oozed at the edges. Dee Dee's face was too small, so the features were all stretched. It was held on via straps that Maddie thought might have been leather.
Mommy! Mommy! Mommy!
The thing wearing her daughter's face screamed and then shrieked. Its mouth opened and dozens of sharp teeth, several rows, showed within a mouth that just kept getting bigger and bigger. Maddie screamed. She screamed and screamed and screamed. Then she saw the pile of bloody parts tucked into the corner beside the bed, and her screams managed to find a new pitch, and still the thing wearing her daughter's face kept laughing. No one breathed. Everyone was hooked on Dennis's story. He still sat on the stone, but he had somehow conveyed everything with his hands. When the neighbors heard her screaming and called the police, she was still in Dee Dee's room screaming. Her vocal cords had burst ages ago, so the scream was little more than a harsh whisper. She had gone completely insane, unable to speak. The creature wearing her daughter's face was gone, but there was a pile of severed limbs next to the bed, and her daughter's head, but missing its face. The police detective said he had never seen anything like it. Maddie just stared, her face and hands covered in blood, and to this day, she resides in a hospital for the criminally insane. Dennis paused again. The eyes bore into him. They say if you listen closely to one of those vents, you might just hear it. Hear it whispering, telling you it wants to show you its face because it needs a new one. Another pause. And just maybe, he said quietly. Then he leaped to his feet. It might be yours! The kids screamed. A few of the older ones screamed too. Then they all laughed. Dennis simply bowed to indicate he was done, and first one camper started to clap, and then the rest. Eventually, they were all clapping and roaring and stood on their feet, cheering, but all of them looking over their shoulders. Dennis had done it again. There were other stories, but no one, as predicted, matched Dennis's story, and when the campfire session broke up, another Friday the 13th was in the books. They all headed back to their dorms. They made spooky sounds and laughed. Good one, Dennis. Great job, man. Dennis nodded and smiled and headed back to his cabin. He smiled as he closed the door, turned on the light, and got ready for bed. In the bathroom, he stared at himself in the mirror. Slowly, a smile formed. It spread wider and wider and wider until it filled his face, which shifted. Dennis reached out and carefully removed the skin he had been wearing for a while now. The face beyond would have driven anyone mad, like it had done with Maddie. Dennis, although his real name was ancient and long since forgotten, began to laugh. He showed his many teeth and tilted his head back and laughed and laughed. So many people here. So many faces.